This is the horrifying story of Colleen Stan, the woman who spent 7 years trapped inside a box under a bed as a slave to a completely psychotic couple. But first, I need to tell you how she even got kidnapped in the first place. The story begins in May 1977. 20-year-old Colleen Stan was hitchhiking from Eugene, Oregon to Northern California. She was on her way to a friend's birthday party. That day, she already turned down 2 rides from random people. Then that's when a bright blue van pulled up right in front of her. A young couple sat in the front, Cameron Hooker, 23 years old, behind the wheel, and his wife, 19-year-old Janice, in the passenger seat. And in the back, there was a small baby. It was a normal, kinda looking family. They asked her if she needed a ride. Colleen got a good vibe. She felt safe. So she got in. She had absolutely no idea she just condemned herself to 7 years in captivity. For the first 30 minutes, everything seemed fine. The couple made small talk with her. The baby cooed softly in the back. Then suddenly, the man Cameron made a sharp turn. The van completely swerved off the main road. Colleen started to panic as Cameron pulled over in a deserted, wooded area. Before she could react, he reached into the back seat, pulled out a knife, and pressed it to her throat. "Don't move." Her breath caught in her throat. Before she could scream, he placed a specially designed wooden box over her head. No, seriously, I'm not even kidding. You see, Cameron Hooker was actually a very skilled carpenter. He had built a box just right. You know the headgear worn by the artist Marshmallow? Well, think of that, but wooden. Soundproof, lightproof, and escape-proof. Everything was black. The next thing Colleen knew, the van was moving again. She had no idea where they were going. It was hours later when the vehicle came to a stop. The van door creaked open. Footsteps. Colleen was then being lifted and dragged. Then she was being carried down some stairs. Then, darkness. Cameron had led her into his basement. He removed the box from her head, and for the first time, she saw where she was. She was now inside another larger wooden crate in a basement. He forced her inside, chaining her wrists so she couldn't move. Then he left her there for the night. That first night, she cried herself to sleep. The space was too small for her to lie down, so she had to sleep sitting up. Then, ladies and boxheads, the real nightmare began. Cameron had these dark desires, twisted fantasies. Until now, he'd been acting them out on his wife, Janice. But she was tired of being the victim. She wanted a replacement. And guys, Colleen was the replacement. The torture started that very next day. She was pulled from the crate and strung up by her wrists, her feet barely touching the ground. The first lash of the whip sent fire through her skin. Then another and another, over and over again until her body was all scratched up and shaking. This continued for days. Then Cameron decided to turn it up a notch. I seriously cannot believe I'm gonna say this. And then came the electricity. He got a car battery and began to shock her. Man, I feel bad just knowing this happened to her. Then the burns. Then to make everything a million times worse began the assault. The days blurred into weeks, the weeks into months, the months into years. She prayed for death, but the death never came. Then one day, the Hookers packed up shop and moved from their house into a mobile home. But they had one problem. They wouldn't have a basement, which means no space for a crate. So Cameron, the carpenter, had a solution. He built a box the size of a coffin, and he slid that box under their bed. For the next few years, Colleen Stan lived inside that box. She was only let out to be tortured, assaulted, or forced to do the housework. The rest of the time, she laid in the darkness, with nothing but air holes to breathe through. On hot days, the temperature inside that box would go above 100 degrees. She would just lay there sweating, her body weak from starvation. And above her, the monsters Cameron and Janice just slept in their bed. Seriously, right on top of her. Now, 2 young children also lived in the house, but they were completely unaware that there was a woman trapped under their parents' bed. Colleen began to lose hope. Maybe she would never escape, maybe she would die in that very box. But the box wasn't even the biggest problem. More than the beatings, more than the abuse, she was afraid of the company. And you might be confused on what the hell that is. So, let me explain. You see, on top of all the abuse Cameron would inflict on Colleen, he also lied to her so she would never think of running away. He told her he was a part of a cult named the Company. The Company was a powerful underground cult that watched her every move. They knew where her family lived. I mean, they had her phone tapped, is what she believed anyways. If she tried to escape, they would come for her and then they would kill her family. And like you would expect, she lived in constant fear and she would not dare to piss Cameron off. So when Cameron handed her a master and slave contract and a pen, she signed without hesitation, believing it was her only way to survive. So ladies and boxheads, she was no longer Colleen Stan. She was now Kay. She belonged to Cameron, and from that moment on, she was to call him master. And Janice was ma'am. Her body, her mind, her very existence belonged to the hookers. Cameron began to trust her actually. First, she was allowed out of the box for short periods of time. Then she was allowed to play in the garden, go for jogs, even eat dinner with the family. These small, controlled freedoms gave her the illusion of control, when in reality, she was still pretty much a prisoner. Then, in March of 1981, 4 years after Colleen was taken, Cameron did something completely unthinkable. I mean, this guy is seriously a psycho. The man let her visit her family. But whoa. Even this was a part of his twisted plan. The rules were very clear. She had to return and she couldn't tell them what was happening. Colleen obeyed. When she arrived home, her family was shocked. They hugged her. They smiled, laughed, and tried to reconnect with their daughter that they had barely seen for years. They even took a picture. In the photo, Colleen and Cameron stood side by side. He introduced himself as her fiance, but the family knew something was off. Colleen barely spoke. I mean, she was reserved and robotic. The girl had no expressions on her face. Her parents sensed something was off, but they were scared that if they pushed too hard, she would completely shut down. They just didn't want to lose her again. So they let her leave. She walked out of their home and back into captivity. The years passed, 7 in total. And then one day, Cameron made a mistake. He told his wife Janice that he wanted Colleen as his second wife. Ladies and boxheads, that right there was the tipping point in this story. Janice had taken Cameron's twisted fantasies for years. She had even helped him keep Colleen imprisoned, but now faced the possibility of being completely replaced. And that's where she had enough. One night, she turned to Colleen and revealed the truth. The company isn't real. There is no cult. He's been lying to you so you don't leave. At first, Colleen couldn't process it. Everything that she'd been conditioned to believe, every fear that had kept her trapped, was all a lie. The world that she's been living in for the past 7 years shattered in an instant. Janice continued explaining how Cameron had made up the entire story. There were no men in suits listening to her phone calls, no secret organization, and no one coming for her or her family. For the first time in 7 years, Colleen felt something new, and that feeling was hope. Janice promised to help her escape. She wanted the girl gone. One morning, Janice secretly drove her to a bus station. Colleen stepped out of the car and hesitated, almost expecting someone to appear and stop her, but no one came. The world outside moved on as if nothing happened. She picked up a payphone. Dad, I need a ticket home. She was going back to Eugene, Oregon. Wait, but before she boarded the bus, she did something really unexpected. She called Cameron and told him she was leaving for good. She knew the truth. Cameron Hooker, the man who had enslaved her for 7 years, broke down on the other end of the line. Colleen hung up. She was free and she was going home. For months, she stayed quiet. Janice convinced her to not report Cameron. Colleen was scared of the shame, the embarrassment, and the trauma of reliving it all. She just wanted to move on and she just wanted to forget. But the guilt started to eat up Janice from the inside. She just couldn't keep the secret in any longer. She needed to tell someone who wouldn't get her in trouble. And so, ladies and boxheads, she went to church. She went straight for the confession booth and spilled everything to the pastor. The second the information was out of her mouth, she felt her shoulders relax for the first time in months. And just like that, she had leaked a secret the police had no chance of finding about otherwise. The perfect crime was now out in the open. And then the pastor called the police. On November 18th, 1984, Cameron Hooker was arrested. But this story didn't end there. During his trial, the police found out that he had done something even worse before Colleen. There was another girl, Marie Elizabeth Spanhake. Janice was the one who came clean to the police and revealed that Colleen was not Cameron's first victim. In January 1976, a year before Colleen, Cameron and Janice had picked up 19-year-old Marie while she was hitchhiking in Chico, California. She never made it home that day. Janice described how Cameron had tortured her, abused her, and eventually killed her. Unlike Colleen, Marie never got a second chance. Her body was never found. Without physical evidence, authorities could not prosecute Cameron for the murder, but they could put him away for what he'd done to Colleen. In 1985, Cameron Hooker was found guilty of kidnapping and sexual assault. He was sentenced to 104 years in prison. And for Colleen, the nightmare was finally over. She tried to rebuild her life, she worked, she traveled, she learned to trust people again. She even changed her name. But I wish I could say this was the only time in history a man like this existed. But unfortunately it isn't, and in this video I talk about a 14-year-old girl who spent 9 months kidnapped and chained up by a religious lunatic. Seriously, this story gets a lot worse, and if you want to hear more about it, click this video right here.